When is Vulcan spoken for the first time in Star Trek? Star Trek has introduced countless fictional languages over nearly 60 years of television, movies, novels, and games, but few have the reputation of Vulcan. Spoken by a species defined by logic, emotional control, and ancient cultural traditions, the Vulcan language has become synonymous with Star Trek's intellectual depth. Fans today can learn it from dictionaries, fan-made grammars, and linguists who have attempted to codify it. But that wasn't always the case. Like Klingon, Vulcan evolved gradually, and its first canonical appearance on screen was more of a subtle whisper than a dramatic linguistic debut. Yet the question remains, when is Vulcan actually spoken for the first time in Star Trek? The answer requires digging into early canon, background details, obscure scenes, and the evolving concept of the Vulcan people. Let's go back to the beginning, before planet Vulcan even had a language. 1. The early days. Vulcan culture existed before its language. When Star Trek, the original series, premiered in 1966, the idea of alien races having full languages wasn't a priority. Despite Spock being half Vulcan, his culture wasn't initially fleshed out beyond traits like pointy ears, suppressed emotions, and a mysterious past. As a result, no Vulcan language appeared in the earliest episodes, not even casual phrases. Instead, Vulcans spoke perfect, neutral English, not surprising, given the show's limited budget and its focus on high-concept sci-fi over deep world-building. Even so, hints of future linguistic development existed. Vulcan naming conventions Spock, Sarek, T'Po, ancient Vulcan rituals like the nerve pinch or pon farr, nonverbal customs such as the salute and the words, live long and prosper. These were cultural identifiers, not linguistic ones. So while fans often assume pon farr qualifies as the first Vulcan phrase, it's simply a term, not full spoken dialogue, and it doesn't appear until Season 2, Episode 1, Amok Time. That episode marks the first words of Vulcan origin, but not Vulcan language spoken on screen. To find the true first instance of Vulcan spoken aloud, we need to move forward to Star Trek's first major expansion, the animated series. To the real first time Vulcan is spoken. Star Trek, the animated series. Star Trek, the animated series 1973 to 1974 is one of the franchise's most overlooked entries, but it quietly introduced major canon, force fields around starships, holodeck prototypes, and even Spock's childhood. It also gave the very first spoken Vulcan dialogue in franchise history. The moment appears in Season 1, Episode 2, Yesteryear. This episode famously depicts young Spock undergoing a Vulcan rite of passage, features Sarek and Amanda, and takes place largely on Vulcan itself. As a result, it incorporates actual spoken Vulcan words, marking the franchise's linguistic debut. The dialogue in this episode isn't extensive or grammatically constructed like modern conlangs. Instead, it consists of ritual words, ceremonial vocabulary, and phonetic fragments, Proto-Vulcan rather than a fully engineered language. This makes Yesteryear the definitive first appearance of spoken Vulcan in Star Trek canon. 3. Why Yesteryear matters more than fans realize. The Vulcan heard in the animated series influenced the language later developed for the films and future shows in several ways. It set the phonetic tone. Vulcan sounds sharp, precise, and formal, reflecting a mathematically structured society. It created a precedent for ceremonial language. Vulcan is rarely casual. Early usage tied it to religion, tradition, and rites. It laid groundwork for future linguistics. Later Klingon creator Mark Okrand also worked on the animated series. His influence indirectly shaped how Vulcan evolved. So while TAS may not be universally treated as essential viewing, its impact on Vulcan culture is undeniable. Without Yesteryear, Vulcan might have become a culture of symbols, not speech. For the next evolution, Star Trek, the motion picture and formal linguistics. The next major milestone came when Star Trek moved from television to film. The motion picture 1979 introduced a formalized, structured version of Vulcan. Unlike the loose phonetics of TAS, this version was grammatically consistent, developed by a linguistic consultant, spoken by multiple actors. The opening scenes on Vulcan contain lengthy, fully constructed Vulcan dialogue with subtitles. This moment is widely regarded as the beginning of Vulcan as a true conlang rather than a storytelling accessory. In short, version significance. TAS 1973 first spoken Vulcan ever. TMP 1979 first formal, linguistically built Vulcan. Both are historically important, but they achieve different milestones. 5. Vulcan and later Star Trek. From ritual words to full conversation. Following the motion picture, Vulcan language became more standardized across the franchise. Star Trek III. The Search for Spock 1984 features ceremonial Vulcan chants during the Fel Torpan ritual. Star Trek Enterprise 2001 to 2005. Because the series focuses heavily on Vulcan politics, religion, and diplomacy, it includes more Vulcan dialogue than any other show at the time. Star Trek 2009 reboot introduces updated pronunciation based on modern linguistic reconstructions, fan and academic expansions. Since the 1990s, linguists and fans have built vocabularies, syntax rules, and writing systems, evolving Vulcan into a learnable language. Unlike Klingon, there is no central governing body like the Klingon Language Institute, meaning Vulcan remains semi-official, collaborative, and evolving, but deeply rooted in its earliest appearances. 6. Does Spock ever speak Vulcan in TOS? Surprisingly, Leonard Nimoy never speaks Vulcan dialogue in the entire run of the original series. He speaks Vulcan terms, Kai Far, Kunat Kalifi, Ponfar, names of rituals and philosophies, but no Vulcan grammar, phonetics, or sentences exist in the series. This is why many casual fans incorrectly assume Amok Time is the first instance of spoken Vulcan. The vocabulary feels like language, but it's still English, just borrowing foreign-sounding nouns. 7. Why Vulcan developed differently from Klingon. It may be surprising that Klingon became a full language earlier and more thoroughly than Vulcan, despite Vulcans predating Klingons in the franchise. The difference is simple. Vulcan Klingon spoke English as part of character design intended to sound primitive, alien, and threatening, associated with serenity and logic associated with combat and nationalism, never needed subtitles, and early canon needed subtitles for dramatic effect. Grew slowly, retroactively was deliberately engineered by Mark Okrand. Klingon needed to be a language. Vulcan only needed to feel ancient and wise. Only later, due to fan interest and lore expansion, did Vulcan evolve beyond ritual vocabulary. 8. The answer. Summarize. If you're just here for the clear, definitive answer, first Vulcan terms used. Amok Time, TOS Season 2 1967. But these are only individual words, not spoken Vulcan language. First spoken Vulcan language. Yesteryear, Star Trek. The Animated Series 1973. First actual Vulcan dialogue spoken aloud. First formal, fully developed Vulcan language. Star Trek. The Motion Picture 1979. First linguistically constructed Vulcan sentences. 9. Why it matters to fans today. The evolution of Vulcan's language mirrors the evolution of Star Trek itself. The franchise started with broad concepts and gradually deepened into a fully realized universe with functioning cultures, politics, scientific principles, and even lingual systems. Spoken Vulcan represents world-building beyond visuals, respect for linguistic realism, character development for one of sci-fi's most iconic species. It proves that Star Trek isn't just about starships and phasers. It's about cultures, civilizations, and how communication forms the backbone of interstellar coexistence. In a franchise built on diplomacy, a language can be just as important as warp drive. Final thought. Spock once said, "The beginning of wisdom is to acknowledge the unknown." For decades, Vulcan remained an unknown, a culture defined by silence more than speech. But once it finally found its voice, it spoke not just for one species, but for the intellectual soul of Star Trek. And like Vulcan itself, the language continues to evolve, to be refined, studied, and honored by those who seek knowledge. After all, in every language, logic is universal. Live long and prosper.